That was a powerful song with a powerful message. And I'm so glad that for the last few weeks, God's been teaching us so much. And I'm grateful to celebrate the next few moments with you. I want to celebrate a moment that we had last week that during our time together, 18 people in this room and 3 people on Daybreak Live gave their lives to Christ for the very first time last week. 21 people. Come on, a little louder. Come on. That's incredible. Yeah, it's starting to feel like college football season when I hear that cheering there. It started, all right? We feeling good about that? Okay, wow. I just don't want us to forget why we are here as a church, and that is to reach people and go on this journey together. And that song speaks so much to that. So I'm just grateful. You are a church like no other, and I've just been so encouraged over the last few weeks. I get feedback from time to time from some of you. I know some of the feedback that you maybe would like to give me, you don't, but you've given me over the last few weeks, many of you, so many thoughts and inspirations that God's been giving you over the last 3 weeks about what we've been talking about, justice. And I've really been praying that God would inspire you personally and would inspire our church to be a change agent of culture in our world. And we're going to be challenged again today as we think about that. So if you're with us on Daybreak Live, we're so glad you're here. And over the course of this series, this is the culmination. This series is unlike no other that I've done since I've been here as pastor, because it's the culmination of 4 years of a project to put together this documentary. And I was joking earlier this morning that when I first became pastor, the most frequently asked question was, Jeff, when's the movie coming out? And in 2021, my answer was probably about a year. That's 2022, if you're doing the math. And then in 2022, Jeff, when's the movie coming out? Probably in about a year. And in 2023, I stopped being asked. And for the few of you that did, I said, I don't know when it's ever may come out. But it's coming out this week. And I hope to see you there on Wednesday. And the person, yeah, thank you. Yeah. The person that inspired a lot of this film is no longer with us. He was a great inspiration to me. He was a dear friend. He spoke here at Daybreak. He was a dear friend of our founding pastor, Wes Dupin, and his name was Keith Drury. And I became aware of something he did in 2006 when he hiked and walked the Trail of Death every mile in the summer of 2006. And that stuck with me. Something lodged in my brain, and I remembered it later, and it's become this journey. But Keith passed away in April unexpectedly, and this movie is in tribute to him, and he has so many really good things to say. His life, as I've reflected after he's passed, it's changed me. He's been one of the most influential people in my life, and I didn't realize quite how influential he was until I realized he's no longer here with us. So this is, every week we've introduced our speakers by showing you a clip, and I invited Keith back in February to be here with us. And he wasn't at that time able to do it because of his health issues. He lived in Florida, but he passed in April. So this movie is a tribute to him. But I do want you to hear some of his words and a little bit of the movie as we remember today Keith Drury. Keith walked the trail of death in 2006. If Keith wouldn't have taken that first step, I don't know if I would have done it. I don't know if I would have heard about it.
You ask yourself, how could humans do this? What's wrong with those people? The question is, what penance should I do? Or some injustice that I participated in, even marginally? What walk can I take to say, no, I'm going another direction than that? Everybody's got a walk to take.
So a great, great man of faith, and I just am remembering him today. So with us, we have a dear friend. He's become a dear friend. And quick little timeline. In May of 2020, I want you to try to go back in time as best you can. Remember what was happening in your world in May of 2020 in the world, because everything in Michigan stopped for sure, and my world was kind of crumbling. And the only source of income that I thought I may have at that point going forward, because of how COVID and all that affected the ministry that I was leading, which was an event-based ministry, the only source of income I had was speaking here once a month. And, you know, Wes was only paying me about $100,000 a year to do that. But it was a little bit of income. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. But I called, Wes is saying it's more than that. Was it? I don't remember. Was there another zero in there? But in May of 20, in fact, it was May 21st, I remember dates, I texted Wes and I said, do you think you'll want me to speak in the fall at Daybreak again? I had been a guest speaker here starting in fall of 19. And I was thinking, well, at least it's something. You know, I was just thinking, how am I going to patch my income together? And Wes texted me back immediately within 30 seconds, which was kind of unusual back then. And now he's at my beck and call. But he texted me back immediately, and I remember right where I was. This is in my bedroom, and I said, hey, do you think you want me again this fall? He texted me back within 30 seconds and said, can we meet? That's all the text said. And I promise you, before God, I had never had this thought before in my life, consciously at least. When I got that text, I felt like God said, he's going to ask you to be the pastor. I'd never thought that before. I held the phone to Ariana, who was standing there next to me. I go, look at this text. I think he's going to pop the question here. And I just had a feeling. So we met the next day. We met in secret. This building was closed. Everything was dark. It was like coming into this weird, spooky place. And we met over in the conference room. And sure enough, Wes said, hey, you know, would you consider being the pastor here? And a few days later, I was talking with Nigel Big Pond, who was our speaker here a few weeks ago, and I was playing this walk, and Nigel had been coaching me a little bit. Nigel said, I think you should film this if you can. And I didn't really know what to do with it, and so I called Wes back and a few other friends, Clint Dupin, Wes's son, and Mike Mullenix' name kept coming up. And so I called Mike Mullenix on a Monday, and we met in Lansing. He lives in Detroit. We met on Wednesday, and then I started walking on Sunday, and Mike went on that journey with me. Mike is an accomplished musician. He's a world traveler. He's a filmmaker. We were out to eat last night, just to give you an idea of the scope of his influence. We were sitting in a restaurant here in Grand Rapids, and Mike looked up on the TV and said, that's when I worked on that commercial. I produced that commercial. He does work on movies, documentaries. He's had things on Netflix and Hulu, and is very accomplished in very many things. But for me, he was the voice in my head that I needed as I was walking, and we began this really great, beautiful friendship. And so today is different. We're just going to have a conversation about some of the things that we learned and where God's been prompting our hearts. And I have a word for you today as a church. But to give you an idea of his talent and creativity, I want you to watch this piece that he created, and I want you to hear the message and how that will tie into what we'll talk about today. So let's watch.
My name's Mike, and I've been making music for about 20 years. And I can remember when I was a young boy just falling in love with sounds. I was listening to my parents' record collection, and I just loved the melodies and the harmonies and rhythms of Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind & Fire, the Beatles, so many more. Music had such a hold on me that around middle school I decided I wanted to pursue a career in music. There was only one problem. I couldn't play an instrument. And what should I play? I had to pick the perfect instrument because learning how to master an instrument was going to take me a long time and a lot of practice. And how much would it suck if I got to the end of all this practice and found out that the instrument that I picked was lame? So in 6th grade, I started on the trombone. But it was pretty awkward as my arms weren't long enough and I could only play one note at a time. Whoop. Yeah, I broke it. So from there, I sat down at the piano, and this thing had 88 keys on it, and it felt completely overwhelming. From there, I was onto the drums. But let's just say that this violated mom and dad's bylaws regarding the acceptable sound levels in the home. friend of mine had a bass guitar. And while it was cool, I could still only play one note. And this thing felt more like a support instrument rather than one that would thrust me into the spotlight like I'd always dreamed. So I almost gave up until one day I was over at a friend's house and I held his electric guitar. This was different. Only 6 strings, the ability to play chords and melodies. And I thought, chicks are gonna dig guitar solos. I soon found out that chicks do dig guitar solos, just not my guitar solos. So I went on to pursue the guitar with all my energy. I learned about the building blocks of music and how to assemble different parts into a song that people would want to listen to. And it was during my music studies in college that I realized something. Music's the ultimate team sport. I mean, my whole quest to find the perfect instrument to play was just silly. Great music requires contribution from other musicians and other instruments to create an experience that's greater than the sum of the parts. Maybe there was no perfect instrument, just different instruments with different roles. I soon discovered that the great composers and arrangers and producers of our time knew how to assign these different voices specific parts that complemented each other. And when they all played together, the result was music. So to help illustrate this, I've invited 2 seasoned string players to join me, my friends Sonia and Andrew. They're going to be playing a small excerpt from an Albrechtsberger duet for violin and cello. Let's start just by listening to the violin part. Gorgeous, isn't it? It has all the characteristics of a finished piece of music. There's melody, dynamics, and rhythm. Let's take a listen to the exact same section, but from the cello part. It feels just as rich to me. I feel like I could walk away from either one of these performances and feel completely satisfied. But let's see what happens when we invite both of these parts to be played together at the same time. So to me, this is such a contrast from the previous 2 experiences. I mean, how much more rich is the music when you hear both parts playing off each other? There's tension and release. There's dominance and restraint from both of the instruments. I mean, it feels more like a story, like there's a deeper perspective. It feels more complete. And this is what I've discovered about life in pursuing music for 20 years. There's no instrument that's better nor worse than another. There's only the creativity to which you lend its unique voice to the ensemble. What if our society saw things in a similar light? What if our schools, our workplaces, our churches, and our communities saw people of differing backgrounds, genders, and perspectives as members of an ensemble working together to make music that's far more rich and powerful than the music that we would ever make on our own? I think it's completely possible. If we can start seeing everyone's voices enriching and vital to the strength of our community's ensemble, the world's going to become an even more melodic, dynamic, rhythmic, and harmonious place. And I can't wait to see what kind of music we're all going to end up writing together.
Okay. A little bit louder, a little bit warmer. Welcome Mike Mullenix here. There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, I don't know if you sneaky saw this in my office this morning, but this picture means a lot to Mike and I, probably more than anyone, just because if you've been here the last couple weeks, you know the story behind this beautiful painting that Mike found in this park where we filmed, and it's in the movie, and this is called Daily Offerings. And Mike, this is just a thank you for our friendship, for your willingness to go with me on this journey, and I know this has a lot of meaning to us specifically, so I want to thank you again. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, man. This is
Yeah.
powerful. This piece does speak a lot to me, and as you guys see the film, you'll probably catch a little bit as to why, but to me, seeing like a Potawatomi person blessing her in the context of being forcibly removed from their land is just, I think it's a beautiful articulation of legitimate, real justice, God-inspired justice, and I think it's like what we should all kind of like aspire to ourselves. So thanks for sharing this. It's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to set it here if that's cool.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you here, and got to hear a little bit about your background, your career. This guy's been on stages in front of tens of thousands of people as a musician, been to many, many countries, in a lot of faraway lands filming. He was with us on our Liberia trip and a project that we're working on for Daybreak earlier this April, and did some content that they haven't even seen yet that you produced. But in all that, tell us a little bit about your background, your family, and then let's talk about when faith kind of started to become real in your life.
Yeah, for sure. And I've loved Daybreak for a long time. Clint Dupin and I both worked together at Kensington Church, which is how I became familiar with Daybreak. And so just want you guys to know, I've been around here. I'm from the Detroit area, but every time I'm on the west side of the state, I stop in. So I'm no stranger to Daybreak, and I really appreciate you guys having me out. And Wes and Claudia, great to see you guys again, too. The question was my background. You touched on it a little bit. First and foremost, I'm a husband, got an amazing wife. I've got two beautiful daughters, one that's 15 and one that's 11. Lydia, my 15-year-old, is now starting to drive, and that's crazy. My 11-year-old, in about a 3-month period, grew 7 feet, so that was also nuts. So we're having a lot of fun at home. But regarding my background, did you want me specifically talking about faith or professional or both?
Well, just tell us a little bit of, like, for example, this guy produces, their family is so creative. You guys met at Belmont University. You met your wife, Renee.
Yep.
So both artists, musicians, very talented. And they produce a digital video Christmas card basically every year. And one year you did a cover of Wonderful Christmas Time. And you got a little personal shout out from the man himself, Paul McCartney, from the Beatles. So that's just a little fun thing about Mike and his background. But in doing that, yeah, let's in the midst of all the things that you've experienced in your life, you grew up in Nashville, Tennessee area.
Yep, grew up in Nashville. Kind of grew up in a home of faith. Grew up in a town of faith. Nashville and Franklin specifically. Went to Belmont University. Kind of started my career in music, doing music production and being a professional guitarist, kind of touring. Played for a lot of different contemporary Christian artists. If you guys followed that back in the 2005 era, I was playing for Matthew West and Rachel Lampa, Zoe Girl, and a lot of those kind of CCM artists and stuff like that. And then end up leaving all that behind because I didn't like being on the road so much. Wanted to kind of be able to start a family and be more close to home, so ended up working for a church in the Detroit area where my wife was from called Kensington, and became the creative director there. And that's actually how I became a filmmaker, because they wanted some videos made and they needed people to make them, and I was like, I'll try. And that literally led to an entire change of pace. It's completely about face. Don't do music much anymore. 100% filmmaking, and just really love telling human stories. I do a lot of advertising, do other kinds of things for work, but my real passion is telling stories about real people that have overcome hardship And that's what I really enjoy doing the most. And that's kind of how we got to know each other, doing this project together, talking about people that are have been through hardship.
Yeah.
You know.
We, as I said earlier in the introduction, we spoke on a Monday for the first time, and we decided to meet halfway. We met in a Chick-fil-A parking lot in Lansing on Wednesday and had this discussion. And here's this guy you've never met saying, I have this thing I'm doing. I'm walking on the trail of death. I don't even really know what this is going to be. And I don't know why we would film this or what we would even do with it. But, you know, what a great pitch to try to hire somebody, you know. And I was like, what do you think? And what was going through your mind? And I guess the big question I'm asking is, why did you say yes?
Yeah, man. Well, I tell you, when, like, first off, in my line of work, you get a phone call, like, on a Monday. You're like, hey, we're going to Antarctica on Thursday. And you're like, all right, let's go. Like, that's just, like, it's you never know where you're going to end up when you're doing films. I've traveled the world doing it, and I've ended up in so many crazy places. And this was another example of that. But I remember you telling me, like, I'm walking this thing called the Trail of Death. And I was like, what is a Trail of Death, and why would anyone want to walk it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like the last thing anybody should want to do, especially in this, like, kind of COVID era. We're all kind of afraid. That's all starting to, like, be real. And then you kind of started sharing your heart and telling me the story. You had this huge event you were going to be doing, and you had been planning that for more than a year. You had raised the funds to do it. You were super excited. You felt like God was in it. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. And then you were like, so now I guess I'm going to go walk by myself for 650 miles. And I was like, now that's interesting. Because, like, honestly, like, that really did say something to me when you said that, because there's not very many people that go from, like, I'm doing an event where there's 100,000 people coming and it's a big deal, to I'm going to go be alone for 3 months walking by myself across the flyover states. You know what I mean? And so I wanted to know more about that. Like, I wanted to know what's going on there. Who are these people? What's that story? This is like the kind of thing, as a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, that's a very interesting person, and interesting people are what we love making films about. So like, that began the, I'm all in, man. Let's go do this, you know.
So then Mike came on Sunday. We filmed a little bit at our house, and then we made the drive down to northern Indiana where the Trail of Death begins. And a lot of us are familiar maybe in our U.S. history class of hearing about the Trail of Tears. And if you remember, if you were here and you saw Nigel Big Pond, who spoke a few weeks ago, there were literally hundreds of these trails, and some had names, most didn't. Most we don't know as much about. This happened to be very well documented, and a removal of Native Americans from Indiana to Kansas. And maybe, as we've talked about this the last few weeks, and maybe as you've thought about things and you've heard about things like the Civil War or slavery or Native American issues or things from history, and you think, that was so long ago. What does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with today? And I was one of those people. I thought, this happened in 1838, and it doesn't really affect me, and it happened long ago, and now we're multiple generations past, so shouldn't we all just kind of move on, acknowledge it, maybe say it happened, but should we just move on? And maybe you've had that thought cross your mind, and I would just say for me that this began with just this interest, and then it evolved into what I call an assignment, where I felt God saying, you need to walk this, and you don't even really know why. And if God speaks to you about something, and let me rephrase that, when God speaks to you about something, and you don't know why, don't toss that aside. A lot of us rationalize it and go, well, that doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to do that, because what's that mean? I need to know the end result. And I'm telling you, most of the time, the overwhelming majority of time, in my experience and what I see throughout the pages of Scripture, is that when God speaks to someone and he gives them an assignment, they have no idea where that road's going to take them. So let me just stop and say that to you, that when God lays something on your heart, and it may not make sense to you, don't just discount what you think you might be hearing. And I think I sensed that we both kind of felt that in that parking lot in Lansing. So we drove down to Indiana, and I began this walk. And I had a couple rules. One rule was like, I'm not watching the news. I kind of made that decision actually previous, but I'm not going to keep up with world events. I just want to be in a space where I'm kind of by myself for the majority of this. And that was difficult. We live in a world where I've discovered that even if you cut yourself off, the world and the events of the world will find you, especially in the summer of 2020 when there were riots and here in our own city of Grand Rapids. And there were monuments being torn down and all kind of crazy things happening. George Floyd had happened. And it just felt like America was kind of unraveling really quickly. And this was happening when I was alone. And Mike, really, you became a window to the world for me. And you shared with me a lot of wisdom. And, you know, as that was happening, what kind of things were you observing with the contrast that you were seeing between, you know, my world and being in this project and the world around us?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, like, here you are. At the time, we didn't know it was called the Justice Trail. You were doing this thing out of an act of obedience, and we were kind of learning together, where is this going? We didn't really know at the time, right? But I remember one day when you were in the middle of this walk, I found it really striking that, like, the country feels like it's like in a crucible moment right now. You have these like chain of events that had led up to. We had like the COVID thing and the pandemic. Everybody's work was being stripped from them. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going on in the future. A lot of fear. We're afraid of this thing. How bad is this really going to get? Like, how bad are the regulations going to be regarding when we can get back to work and whatever? Then on top of that, you had these other like narratives unfolding where you had like Ahmaud Arbery murdered. You had George Floyd murdered. And now these weren't just stories from the African American community that were being told based on their lived experience as a story. We had these things happening in like 4K video, and they were like on social media, and we were watching it, and we were appalled. And then that set off a chain reaction, like almost this crucible moment where the country just kind of went nuts. And so all this was happening. The country is crying out for justice. There's fear. There's this groaning that's kind of happening in both discourse and actuality with the way people are feeling about life in this country. And here you are by yourself walking this trail. And to me, I remember thinking, like, this is like an actual path toward justice. Being willing to draw nearer to the pain of a people group that you don't belong to is the antidote to all of this other stuff that we're dealing with right now in the country that we have not done a great job of dealing with. And I remember you saying, like, one of the mantras you were saying on the trail was like, the only way to make sure that we don't repeat the past is to actually go back to the past and take a look at what happened there and deal with it, so that the next generation stands a chance of not repeating the mistakes of the previous one. And so you going on this walk, drawing nearer to the pain of the Potawatomi people, learning about that pain, hearing those stories, walking where they had been, was steps towards saying, like, on my watch, something like this is not going to happen again because I am now more familiar with what this pain what it truly costs, you know? And so I just remember that it was an amazing moment of, like, we haven't done a good job of issuing justice, and here we have somebody who is doing the work of issuing justice, and what it looks like is being, like, alone and in, like, months of trudgery and blisters on the feet, and it's quiet and small and not 100,000 people, it's one person. And I thought that contrast was really striking.
My dad was a family historian. He's no longer with us on this side. He's fully alive, but just not here. And he was always impressing upon me how I was a product of my past and my family. I want you to think about your family for a minute. How much do you know beyond your grandparents about your family? Because there's something about how we are formed from our past. So this isn't just cultural, it's also individual, familial in terms of your family. And I would encourage you to really give some thought. Maybe jump on a website where you can do some research if nobody has, because what I've learned through this personally too is that your past is it's so formative in who you are, and it's who I am from my family, where they lived, what they did, what they thought, their beliefs. And I think there's ways to end the generational cycles of brokenness in our families by doing the same principle of saying, I'm gonna think about the brokenness that I inherited. Most of the time, we all think our families are normal when we grow up. And then all of a sudden, you remember the moment that you realized your family wasn't normal? And some of you are going, wait, it's not, and this is your moment. And you're going, wait, your family has brokenness in it. And the way to change that for the future is to think about where that brokenness comes from and what it is, and identifying it so that you can end that cycle. And the Bible talks over and over that for those that love the Lord, he will bless them to 1,000 generations. So he begins new generational patterns. We were talking about that this morning on the way here, just with our families and background. And in those discussions we were having, Mike, there's one part, we kind of watched a little bit of the movie last night as he was here in town, and we're looking at identifying some of those days. And man, I remember the one day that it's one of the pictures that you probably seen images where I was just beside myself and just ready to be done. And I thought this was my ending point, and I could see you and another guy, Cam, on the horizon, and I knew that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And when I got there, it was like one of the hottest days, and I was really tired and just broken in a lot of ways. And you said, yeah, you got 5 more miles to go. And in a car, no big deal. When you're walking and you've been walking all day and it's 90 degrees, that's a big deal. And that was the day after that I got attacked by a dog, and I thought that dog was going to bite my ear off. And you just infused within me this encouragement that got me through, and you were a voice to me. And I do believe that if you're at a place of brokenness, you need to identify the voices around you. You know, God's providing a voice for you. This voice came out of nowhere. I didn't know him from anyone, and a few days in, I find myself at the lowest point in my life, and at that point, basically a stranger is speaking into my life and guiding me and encouraging me, and that's maybe what you need right now. And if you're struggling with your faith or with an issue or a relationship or a brokenness, I want to say this, that there was a man in the Bible named Jacob, and he was chosen by God to be a great person. And he is a foundation to our faith, even if you don't know who he is. And he wrestled with God. And in that story, God renames him, and he changes his name from Jacob to Israel. And the word Israel means he who struggles with God and overcomes. And I want to say this. A lot of times I think our life is determined by how we deal with the struggles that we have. You can either collapse in defeat or you can rise to victory. If you have a struggle in your life right now, you need to know that if you're a follower of Christ, you're a part of the struggling people. We struggle. God embedded that into the name of his leader, Jacob, to Israel. You're the struggling people. Don't be afraid of the struggle, because God's going to push you through it, and he's going to give you voices like he did in my life with Mike. And I've been asking this question, Mike. You've traveled the world. You've seen a lot. You've been many places, been in many cultures. You've seen Christianity in many different contexts. You've seen other faiths. You've seen many cultures. How would you define justice?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that the definition of justice is super important, and there's probably a million different ways that you could define it. And a lot of times in certain cultural contexts, the word justice has kind of become a charged word. It can be used as a barb. Oh, you're a social justice warrior. Or it can be used as like guilty or innocent, or it could be thinking more like true, false kind of thinking, and the definition that I've really gravitated towards when it comes to justice is identifying what belongs to whom and returning it if it's been taken. And what I love about this definition is that it's like water. It'll fill the size of the vessel and the context that you happen to put it in. And I think it's really important, because if you're going to talk to somebody who is maybe in an abusive relationship, justice to them looks like safety. And if you're going to talk to somebody who has gone hungry, justice to them looks like food. If you're going to talk to somebody like the Potawatomi who have been forcibly removed from their land, justice to them looks like a welcoming back to their land. And so we can use that term to say that we're identifying a place where something went wrong. And as those of us that are followers of Jesus, listening to him pray a prayer, he made it really clear that it was important to him that he wanted all things on earth to be the way that they are in heaven. And so justice to us is like, how do we restore things to the way that they were and make it look more the way that it is in heaven? And so it lets us be really creative with justice instead of like defining it in a very rigid way and then saying, well, is this justice or is it not? I think it invites us into so many different places where we can analyze how to bring justice into our families, into our communities. I think when you look at the person of Christ, I find it's justice all over the place. It's like the woman at the well. Well, what was she lacking? She was lacking her dignity. Well, Jesus restored that and gave it back to her. You know, you look at the women that came to the tomb, you know, they were the ones entrusted with the message. Go tell everybody that Jesus is risen. This was an act of justice, taking women who typically didn't have voices in this culture and returning it to them, giving them a voice. And now they get to go be the one entrusted with the news that Jesus is risen. I mean, so when you start reading the scriptures, you start looking at the person of Christ through this lens of justice, it becomes one of the most important components, in my opinion, of following Christ. Because everywhere he went, whether it was restoring sight to the blind, whether it was raising people from the dead, it's always a restoration of something that was taken from somebody. And so as you were on this walk, the whole thing was like, you're drawing nearer to the pain of these people and resonating with the pain of what it must have been like to have been removed from your home and forced out through nothing that you had done wrong. And as you struggled to make that journey and make that walk, I've watched this in you. It's changed you. Like, it's softened you in a way that in the beginning of the walk, it was more about the struggle of walking. Yeah. And since the walk has concluded, it's like, it's almost this deeper pain of like, how do we make things right? Yeah. What does it look like to make things right? And this is a place where, in my opinion, the church should be leading culture. Yeah. If anybody wants to know how to make things right, follow or look at those that are following in the ways of Christ, who did nothing but make things right and new. You know, and so justice should be like one of the most important components of a church and of Christ's follower.
Yeah, it changed me. I remember my girls, when I came back, they're like, Dad, you're like crying all the time. What happened to you? And I said, well, probably some of it had to do with watching Frozen 503 times. But it did change me for sure. And I've seen it change you. And the Justice Trail, I need to give credit where credit's due. We couldn't, for years, we didn't know what this was, and we tried to, I'm going to tell a little bit more about, on Wednesday, of just about how this whole thing happened, turned into a movie. But Mark Courtney, right here on staff, who has been a pivotal part of this project, we were talking about it, and he said, what about Justice Trail? And as soon as he said it, I was like, that is the title. I knew it. And the Justice Trail is a metaphor for you. It's a journey that I know that God wants to take all of us on. And that journey, I've summarized it this way. It begins with a problem that you can't ignore, leading to a pain that you can't imagine, ending with a purpose that you can't imitate. It begins with a problem that you see in the world, and you can't unsee it. You can't ignore it. And then that leads you into a pain, a struggle. And that's where we get tripped up. When we experience pain, we can start to scapegoat things or blame God or just run away from it and not be willing to stay near it. And you got to stay near the pain. And some of you are in pain right now, and our natural instinct is to get out of there. I don't want to be near pain. Now, I want to be clear that if some of that pain is abuse or things that are unjust, you clearly need to be away from those things. But if there's something that you see that's beyond you, is really what we're talking about. And you see that. You see a problem, and then that leads to pain, and then that leads to a purpose for you. And that's really my hope for you, is that you would find that. And people that view this film and hear about this, they would begin to take their own journey. It may not be a physical journey, but it's definitely a spiritual journey. And you mentioned something, Mike, about the church. And what's that mean to us that follow Jesus when it comes to justice?
Yeah, I just think that it should be a priority. And I remember hearing from a teacher, Mark Laverton, once that, like, there's no such thing as worship without justice. And he was, like, bringing that to the table to say that worship is actually an action. It's not like a state of mind. It's not just like a rendering of praise. It's like that leads to actual actionable change in the reshaping of societies and cultures, to where there are no longer marginalized voices. There is no longer oppression and pain. There's no longer abuse. There's no longer forced, removed people from society. And similar to the video that we played earlier, when you go see an orchestra play, a 92-piece orchestra, it's overwhelming. And it's like kind of a pinnacle of like musical experience, because you have 92 different things coming together to make a sound that's way bigger and better than anything that any one of those things could have made by themselves. And I really think that that's a great little metaphor for what, the kingdom of God looks like. It's a place where, like, there's this level of harmony and value. Like, the trumpet is not more important than the bassoon or the violin or the snare drum in that ensemble. They're all working together to do something incredible. And I think that where we've kind of missed the mark as we've built societies and cultures is we've kind of made teams and we've kind of made tribes and we've kind of decided power for us is better than power for them. And I think that that's not seeing the world through the lens of God, which is like abundance. It's seeing it through scarcity. And so I think justice is like believing in abundance. Justice is drawing nearer to the pain of people and then doing whatever it takes to return to them what has been taken. And I think that when we do that, guess what? On earth as it is in heaven. And the church is like just primed to be the world leaders in how to do that. We have like such an amazing model in the person of Christ showing us the way on how to do that. It's really hard. It's not easy to do any of it. You walk 650 miles in a blazing sun instead of going and doing an event that you were looking forward to. That had a high cost. But the reverberation of that and like the leadership of Keith Drury that inspired you to do it, here we are talking about it, like God is doing a work through that. And I think that all of us are invited to identifying places in our own neighborhoods, workplaces, communities where a justice trail can be walked. We can draw nearer to the pain of a person and then have our life completely rewired based on resonating with that person's pain.
Powerful, powerful. Can we thank Mike for his words today?
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
And thank you, man. It was a real honor.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Well, I'm going to see if we can pull off something here. The song that we heard earlier, are we able to do that song again? Am I getting a yes? That song was so powerful. I think it just speaks to who we are. Last week, okay, good. We can do it. Good, that's a good sign. Okay. There are some times when it's good to be planned and it's good to go with the flow. We're going to go with the flow here for a second because last week, God rescued many people right here in this moment. And we didn't plan that months ago. It just happened. And, I heard this song leading up to today, but when I heard it this morning, I just maybe felt a little prompting from God that that he might be calling some of you into something that I think he is. I know he's calling our church into some new things. And if he's calling you into something, here's what we're going to do. We're going to listen to this song, and as we're hearing it and participating and singing it together, if there's just something that God's stirring in you about what we've been talking about, he's calling you into something, and you might be like me, like you just need to take a step forward. You don't even know what it means or where it's going to go. I just want to comfort you in that you may not know, and you don't have to know. And right now, you obviously don't need to know. And don't let that stop you. But as we sing this song together, if God's just stirring up something, I'm going to ask you to be bold today. I'm going to ask you to just step up here around the front. I'm going to close the service in prayer. We have prayer partners here, and you may feel a hand on your shoulder from one of them or someone else from Daybreak that's just standing in support with you to just pray as we sing this song. And some of you are like, man, this is weird, Jeff. I've never done this before. Hey, just don't let any of those things get in your mind. Just respond if God's speaking. This could be a life-changing moment for you. I really sense it will be. So stand with me. And as we hear this song, if God's just stirring something, just come to the front and we'll pray and close our time together today.
The God who feeds 5,000 hungry people. You're the God who stops the guilty stranger from being stoned. You're the God who judges us as with fire. The justice that you bring is merciful. You rule, you reign. Let justice like a river roll again. You rule, you reign. Let justice like a river roll again. You're the God who dethrones kings and exiles nations. 'Cause judgment is the path that leads us home. You're the God who speaks his word from the fire. The justice that you bring is powerful. The justice that you bring is powerful. You rule, you reign. Let justice like a river roll again. You rule, you reign. Let justice like a river roll again. You rule, you reign. Let justice like a river roll again. You rule, you reign. Let justice like a river roll again. Let justice like a river roll again.
Let's take a moment and pray and again invite God to speak to us in these moments as he's spoken to many of us here, maybe on Daybreak Live, and ask where God would lead us. I want us to pray about a couple things: our friends, ourselves, and our church. Where's he leading us? Let's pray. Father, we give these moments to you, and we thank you that you've clearly been speaking to us. And this powerful expression of music has stirred us to consider what it means to walk with you in this life and to participate in restoration God, as we think about those whose lives were changed last week, we're just so thankful that for those of us that have experienced that new life, you've changed us. And that means that you've called us to participate with you in this world and bringing change. And I thank you for that. I thank you for our courageous friends today here in the house and some on Daybreak Live that have responded today. And Lord, as their friends, as fellow people on the path, we just pray that you would bring clarity and passion and peace to their heart. And for our church, Lord, would you guide us in the path you want to lead us to bring restoration, justice, healing, love. Not just organizationally, Lord, but individually, at our workplaces, at school, at home, in our neighborhoods, in our clubs, and our teams. Lord, that we would bring people that are the light of the good news of Jesus everywhere we go. In Jesus' name, amen. Before you go, a couple quick things. We have this thing called Project 168. Many people are still signing up, and we got a couple weeks to go. But here's the thing. We saw 21 people give their lives to Christ last week. What if we saw 50? What if we saw 100? I think, without a doubt in my mind, one of the reasons that we saw that amount of people respond last week is because we have a whole team of prayer warriors here that you don't even know about. I want to invite you into something. Might be a step for you. You can find out more on our website. Our growth guides, I'm going to give you a preview next week. We're going to kick off the year. I'm going to take you through where we're going this whole year. But I want you to see those growth guides, those here in the house on the way out. Pick those up for you and your kids. Last thing, next week, if you come here at 10, you're going to split right in the middle between our two services. We're kicking back into our normal schedule, 9:30 and 11. So do not forget that. We'll remind you, but we're ready. Invite someone. Next week's a big week. Are you ready? Okay. Hope to see you Wednesday. God bless.